May 6th, 2015. A new racing game bursts onto the scene, an already established and steadily growing community of excited racers eager to ignite a fresh success story. Project C.A.R.S, as it's called, is stunning to look at, full of content, full of potential. 10 years, 3 months and 18 days later, Project C.A.R.S 3 is being delisted, and there will be no sequel. A disappointing conclusion to a turbulent trilogy, one born from passion and remembered fondly by many, but one which would ultimately end in the alienation of a devoted fanbase. With exclusive insight throughout, this is the story of the Project C.A.R.S franchise, its rise, demise, and everything in between. I remember as a sim racing teenager competing on the likes of R Factor, iRacing and Race Room, stumbling across social media posts for a new upcoming crowd-funded racing game. The screenshots showed detailed car models, photorealistic cloud cover, spectacular lighting effects. Considering this was around 2012, it looked sensational. Having previously developed Need for Speed Shift and Shift 2 Unleashed, with lineage stretching back to the revered GTR franchise, Slightly Mad Studios, or SMS, wanted to create its very own multi-discipline racing game. But studio founder Ian Bell decided to go about things a little differently, looking to bypass traditional publishing methods.
So I come up with the notion of WMD, people investing into the game and getting paid.
World of Mass Development was an investment portal where anybody, including gamers and sim racers, could sink their hard-earned into the development of this new racing game. If it was to eventually make profit, they would earn a share of it relative to their initial investment. This approach, directly involving the immediately burgeoning fanbase in the development and success of the game itself, was unique, and it worked.
We paid everyone 3 times, more than 3 times their investment. They got it back. So instead of giving it to the publisher, we were overjoyed to give it to the players. And we made some money, they made some money. The publishers that come in, because we did it in console, they made some money. And yeah, everyone was happy.
It also meant that when Project C.A.R.S, the word C.A.R.S doubling up as an acronym for Community Assisted Racing Simulator, eventually launched in 2015, there was already an avid community of players, many of whom were financially invested, rooting for the title's success. Perhaps some were also more willing to defend its shortcomings. Opinions on that first Project C.A.R.S title depend entirely on your perspective. For hardcore PC-only sim racers, the driving experience just didn't match the existing big hitters. Firstly, the physics were just too inconsistent. I mean, some of the GT cars and touring cars felt pretty good, but the Formula cars, anything with high levels of downforce, high levels of power, even the karts at the start of the career mode, they all just missed the mark somewhat. It just didn't feel as grounded as an iRacing or an Assetto Corsa. Didn't feel as realistic, although it was still quite a lot more realistic than many of the casual racing game options out there. And the AI opponents, as you can probably see, could be pretty dreadful. On the highest difficulty levels, you're faster than them on the straights, but they seem to have way more grip than you through the corners. They also seem far superior under braking. They turn on DRS in all the strangest places, including mid-corner. And if they go down the inside of you or in any way alongside you, they will just railroad you off the circuit like you're not there. It wasn't so bad in tin tops. Anything with closed wheels, you could have some door banging and some good racing, but single-seaters, nightmare. But this doesn't tell the full story. Hardcore PC sim racers only make up a small percentage of overall racing game fans, and SMS brought this game to both PlayStation 4 and Xbox One consoles. Driving dynamics are of course important, but there are so many other ingredients that go into making a good racing game for the masses. Project C.A.R.S featured a vast and diverse array of content, blending licensed, unlicensed and fictional elements. The car roster included everything from road and touring cars to prototypes, historics and single-seaters. Its eclectic track list had icons like Spa, Bathurst, Circuit de la Sarthe and the Nürburgring Nordschleife, fictional recreations of Suzuka and Monaco, and niche options such as Cadwell Park and Ruapuna for motorsport enthusiasts. Fictional point-to-point routes like California Highway and Azure Coast live long in the memory. The online racing was plug and play, whether with friends or in an organised league, but the single-player career is often cited as one of the biggest plus points. I always appreciated its tier-based progression, as well as the contract system, objectives, and collectible accolades. Although in reality, the sheer quantity of invitational events made it a grind for completionists. The AI inconsistency didn't help either. For me, however, the biggest selling point of Project C.A.R.S was its spectacular aesthetic. Look at that, look how beautiful this is! Find me a more jaw-dropping racing sunset. So many cinematic and show-stopping moments were delivered throughout a lap as day-to-night transitions took place. Add dynamic weather into the mix with detailed raindrops, puddle build-up and blinding spray, and you were left with a visual experience ahead of its time. It still stuns, even in 2025. For anybody who wasn't playing on the higher difficulty levels or taking the AI racing too seriously, this was an easy to pick up and play game with gorgeous graphics, solid performance, VR, small loading times, decent handling even on a controller, lots of content, and an engaging career mode. It wasn't a sandbox, and it could put a smile on your face pretty quickly. While sim racers generally viewed it as a sim title with downgraded physics but a better, deeper overall gaming experience, the majority of racing game fans and the majority of reviewers lauded it. Project C.A.R.S looks great, sounds fantastic, and feels even better, said IGN, giving it an 8.9 out of 10. To say that Project C.A.R.S was made by the fans and for the fans doesn't quite do it justice. 8.6 out of 10. Beautiful, bold, and varied. PC Gamer giving it 8.3 out of 10. The average Metacritic score was an impressive 83 out of 100. And after such a strong start, it was now time for Phase 2. But would the development team rush out a tweaked sequel to capitalise on momentum and goodwill, or take its time to deliver something far superior with improvements across the board? In reality, it sort of did both. Less than 2 years on from the original launch, Project C.A.R.S 2 was announced, and it would appear later that same year on September 22nd, 2017. From minute one, this felt like a significant step forward. The user interface was altogether more intuitive, easier to navigate, and with cleaner menus. The car roster expanded in every direction, more cars, new classes, and even a new discipline in the form of rallycross. This of course meant new mixed surface venues, on top of numerous new asphalt venues, and the introduction of historic layouts for the likes of Spa, Silverstone, Monza, and Hockenheim, along with Rouen-les-Essarts, increasing the total number of venues twofold. Virtual reality optimizations made it a leader in that sector, and the weather was even more spectacular this time around, the impressive dynamic system now including snowfall and even blizzards. A revamped career mode retained its premise but added depth with manufacturer affinity, additional tier paths, and regional series before each national championship. Invitationals were less invasive, feeling more like additional side quests that could be completed in your own way. One really interesting and innovative feature was the Race Engineer, which could be found within the car setup menu. When you go into here, say you're struggling with the rear end of the car being a bit loose, you go into downforce, you say, I keep spinning out in fast corners, and it actually gives you some advice as to what you can do about that with the setup. We can read the description, we can either click here to raise the rear downforce by one click, or we can head to the suspension menu and give further details of what's happening. So the car is turning too much into corners, for example. Where in the corner is this happening? It's basically a setup troubleshooting tool. Amazing. On track, the physics had matured, the car's feeling more grounded, if still somewhat inconsistent across the board, and controller play, incredibly important for a console market, still felt good for an accessible racing game. The driving feel still couldn't quite match the purest of sim-focused PC titles, but it was, again, right up there for the average player. Of course, not everything was rosy. Certain curbs, especially on corner exits, had this nasty grabbiness that would pull your car in as if it was a Kielder ditch or a Swedish snowbank, and despite a largely improved AI experience, featuring an additional aggression level slider and more manageable open-wheeler action, rendering inevitable lap 1 restarts a thing of the past, there was still wild swings in opponent performance from one race to the next. Some notable flaws and areas to improve, in an otherwise exhaustive and impressive title.
What we did with Project C.A.R.S 2, it was such a complete package. Yeah. It was all there. And I think what people are seeing now is these bits of games. They're coming in bits and pieces. And you know, it's not easy. It's an awful lot of work to have a complete game.
Both this game and the original did a great job of walking the tightrope between a gaming experience that was focused on fun and a simulation that was focused on the hardcore physics. I think it found a middle ground that many others have struggled to find, and that pleased a lot of people.
I think we were very proud of Project C.A.R.S 2 for what it is. I mean, I'm never happy with anything. I'm always disappointed in some area. You know, you can't do everything. You'll never reach perfection. But that drive and the passion that's in us because of that drive for perfection is what keeps me going.
In June 2020, almost exactly halfway between the franchise's 2015 launch and the present day, Project Cars 3 was officially announced, and this was when things took a turn for the worse. Just before we dive into that, let me know if you're enjoying this style of video down in the comments below. And if you are enjoying it, do consider subscribing to this Traxion channel. Around 80% of you watching this video are likely not to be subscribed, and by subscribing you get to see these sorts of retrospectives in future when they're released come into your inbox, and of course it helps support us in the process. If it's not for you, that's absolutely fine, and I hope you enjoy the rest of this video. It had been a busy time for SMS on the lead up. In 2019, as well as developing the upcoming third installment, it announced the completely separate Fast and Furious Crossroads, a racing and RPG hybrid based on the famous film franchise bearing the same name, even featuring the likes of Vin Diesel himself. It also launched Project Cars Pro, essentially a repackaged, streamlined version of Project Cars 2, designed for public sim centres and events. I remember it well. In fact, I was actually working in a sim centre at the time running and testing Project Cars Pro, and let me assure you, it was a busy period for everyone involved. Throw in the acquisition of Slightly Mad Studios by Codemasters in November of the same year, and Ian Bell's Madbox proposal, touted to be SMS's very own games console that never materialised, and you had at least 4 major projects and an ownership restructure all happening at once. Perhaps, with a relatively diminutive team, it had bitten off more than it could chew.
Look, you try to ship one game on multi-platforms with a team of around 100 people or less, 75, 80 people. It's a miracle. That's absolutely miraculous. Get all those 3 at the same time shipping. It's a small miracle. Double that with 2 completely different games with the same size team. Shipping within a month of each other. Yep. No one's done it in history. Yeah.
The COVID-19 pandemic at the turn of the decade certainly didn't make things any easier for the thinly stretched studio, but I believe the real damage was caused by a paradox of hyperbole. In a series of now deleted tweets and GT Planet forum posts reported on by multiple reputable racing game outlets at the time, Ian Bell had initially claimed that this game would be a spiritual successor to Need for Speed Shift, more focused on bringing fun back to sim racing. The choice of language left many fans of the existing Project Cars titles concerned. Was this going to be another realism-focused game like the previous ones, or was this going to be a new, more casual alternative? Bell not only reassured those players, posting that fun would not be at the expense of a deep physics system, and SMS would really go to town on sim goodness. He went one step further, claiming this game was at least 200% better already, very likely making this statement in relation to Project Cars 2, given the overall context of the flurry of tweets. It was to be a revolution, a game changer. You now had skeptical sim racers and existing fans expecting a step forward and a better sim than its predecessor, and you had casual racing game fans expecting a more fun-focused overall gaming experience on top of that. In reality, the game disappointed on both fronts. This was nothing like Project Cars 1 or Project Cars 2 in the physics department. Nothing at all. The game's clearly geared towards players using a controller, looking to slide their cars around the racetrack, akin to maybe a Forza title or an older Grid game, or even a Need for Speed Shift. It was about the sense of speed, the quick-fire racing action, not about nuanced vehicle dynamics or strategic motorsport elements, for instance. Now, whilst the content was again commendable compared to other simulations, it was lacking when compared to wider-reaching casual racers. And again, whilst the career mode was a little more playful and progression-focused than a traditional sandbox simulator, that didn't matter to sim racers, because they weren't the ones playing this game anymore. Despite the changes to its structure, looking more like a Drive Club alternative with XP, a car leveling system, upgrades, numerous event types, and an in-game livery editor, it wasn't nearly as immersive a gaming experience as a Forza Horizon or a Gran Turismo. Regardless of the outlandish and dishevelled marketing strategy, behind closed doors at least, SMS was aware that its initial vision for an authentic numbered successor wasn't going to be realised with this game.
We knew it wasn't going to be what we wanted. To be honest, if Project Cars 3 was called Project Cars Sideways and sold as a Forza Horizon...
And was it going to be open world at any point?
Simcade, there was going to be open world elements as well as circuits, right?
Okay.
So we were going to basically take the environments and extend the circuits, you know, and that's easy. And the engine worked very well, our engine, the Madness engine, for large open areas.
You could say this game was a simple case of mistaken identity, and if you treat it as a standalone racing game, it can still be an enjoyable experience. But its shortcomings go beyond its identity crisis. The game looks tangibly worse than its predecessor, with low-fidelity cockpits and fuzzy weather effects. There's just an overall lack of polish and sharpness to it all. AI opponents were still inconsistent. Features like multi-class racing, pit stops, fuel consumption and tyre wear were all removed, and harsh track limit penalties for crossing a line or tapping a wall would cause bizarre slowdowns or lap invalidations that felt completely at odds with the fun-first door-to-door racing action. It was an incohesive, misrepresented and ultimately rushed product, which on its own would have been a blot on the Project Cars copybook, but was made much worse by the grandiose statements ahead of its launch. What really didn't help reputations was the even more disastrous Fast and Furious Crossroads, launching mere weeks earlier. IGN called it short, shallow and a disappointment in almost every department, giving it a 4 out of 10. It averaged a Metacritic score of just 35 out of 100, and whilst Project Cars 3 was also a big downgrade from its predecessors, going from an 83 and an 82 to a 70, what really stands out is its user score of just 4 out of 10. The reviewers saw it as a relative disappointment, but the existing community had taken it personally. The task of rebuilding trust and reputation now rested on Project Cars 4, but SMS was seemingly still juggling too many balls. Alongside the development and launch of a forgettable free-to-play mobile spin-off, Project Cars Go, there were structural changes aplenty. Codemasters had been acquired by Electronic Arts for an estimated $1.2 billion in February 2021, meaning Slightly Mad Studios were now under its ownership, and the previous relationship between SMS and EA had ended on frosty terms following Shift 2 Unleashed.
We'd just been shafted by Electronic Arts. They'd put us on a system whereby we couldn't arrange any work for after Shift 2.
Less than a year later, with Project Cars 4 well underway, Bell left Slightly Mad Studios.
Whatever Project Cars 4 would have been, my remit, and it came just at the point where I'd had enough and left. Yeah. We were quarter, third, half, somewhere through development of Project Cars 4. It was a hardcore sim. Yeah. It was going back to Project Cars 2 and moving that forward.
Unfortunately, as it turned out, this redemption attempt would never see the light of day. In November 2022, EA withdrew investment for the franchise, halting all development. A year later, the first 2 games were delisted, and in late August 2025, Project Cars 3 was too. But the story doesn't end here. After a period of gardening leave, Ian Bell returned to the racing game industry in late 2022. He no longer owned any of the rights to Slightly Mad Studios or the Project Cars franchise. That was all still with EA, going through a controlled shutdown. Instead, he founded a new studio, going by the name of Straight 4, rehired many members of the original SMS team, and they set to work, combining elements from the legendary GTR franchise and Project Cars to create a true spiritual successor.
It's Project Cars 2 come GTR 2 into the modern day with the very best code that we can write and the best art that we can create.
The clue is in the title. Project Motor Racing, set for release on November 25th, 2025, promises to be the game that Project Cars 3 arguably should have been, and Project Cars 4 might have been. But hard lessons from history should be heeded. The scars are still somewhat fresh, and until I get my hands on the finished game, I'm going to remain both skeptical and cautiously optimistic. So where do you stand on the franchise as a whole? Let me know down in the comments below. I'll tell you where I stand. As a real racer and a fan of hardcore sim racing as well as your Gran Turismos and Forza Horizons, I can thoroughly appreciate what Project Cars 1 and 2 achieved. They found a middle ground, a gateway drug if you like, that could please anyone with an open mind, regardless of where you sit on the scale. They weren't the best at any one thing, but they were good enough at pretty much everything. The third title went against the ethos of the original project. It wasn't funded by the players for the players, it was an offshoot for a different demographic. A demographic which already had plenty of established AAA racing titles to choose from. Like a footballer that's left their childhood club to join a bitter rival, only to be left on the bench. I really do think it should have been called Project Cars Sideways or something like that instead of Project Cars 3. Who knows whether that would have changed anything. And that is going to round things up. Remember, you can read all about the upcoming Project Motor Racing on the TraxionGG website, link is in the description below, and also you can check out a pair of hands-on previews for the game at different stages of development via this very YouTube channel. To those of you who have made it this far, thank you so much for watching, and I hope you all have a great day.